Journal entry number A1. I know we, brothers, have always known that our lives outside of our little nest would be so dark, difficult, disastrous, and painful. And yet, despite our understanding of the concept of it, it does not feel the same once life forces itself on us, even though it already was from the start. We were just deluded. We were expecting it to be how it is after all. And yet, here we struggled, tooth and nail. Was there anything that could have prepared us for it? No. We thought we were better. We should have been. Did we try? Yes. Till all of our blood drained. And thus, it is so. End journal entry. Winds were ravenous, lifting trees, ripping roots, rain pours, flat, dry farmland turn to lakes, mountain faces peel off as the soil slides down. Rivers and swamps fill past the banks and leak. What would have been part of the course of a somewhat unusually strong typhoon? If only that was all to it. Corpses fell from the sky. Men, women, and sea creatures. Swarms of parasites crawled out of those corpses. The storm winds grabbed them up. They flew high and far. The typhoon brought them from island to island. What the tourism industry would call a tropical paradise. It was not, and is made even worse, into a hellhole. The parasites landed, crawled and gouged into the flesh of humans. Only a few seconds later, the victims began collapsing, convulsing, the veins pulsating, mouths struggling to scream, while they were vomiting blood. The darkest aspects of humans and primates and animals emphasized and brought into the surface. In terms of behavior, in terms of action, in terms of mind, and in terms of body. As they were in suffering, bones were breaking, contorting. During the whole ordeal, victims digged their nails onto themselves and pulled while they still could. Repeatedly and hard, they would mutilate their already corrupt bodies. Their jaws grew, stretched forwards. Small, white, fragile, and stubby human teeth fell off. In their place burst out long, dark, red, robust, and sharp fangs. Blood poured out of the pores, appearing out of their fingertips. As the skin and flesh were being pushed apart, bone grew forwards. It stretched and thickened, began curving and darkening. Claws longer than hands themselves. Their feet each had sickle-like claws, and out of their backs a bulge so large it forced the victim to hunch over. All of their hair would fall off. Their skin turned rugged and thick. At the end, they rise full of hate and malice. Their bodies looked gaunt and starved. However, they were filled with the zealous vigor to spread the corruption and hunger to maul any resistance. They no longer spoke with cohesive speech. The sounds out of their mouths were roars, howls, chattering, clicking, squeals, squeaks, and growls. Only the most simple of speech were possibly uttered out of rage. Kill, down, kill, death, corrupt, kill. They were chanting as they amassed in large groups. In the center of the large crowds stood a tall creature. It stands twice the height of any man. Each hand had a massive curved blade, the size of a human. A pair of claws beside each blade. 3 human heads on long, flexible, tendril-like necks. Each head with seemingly glowing rims around desolate black pupils that filled the whole eye. A human torso as desecrated as the other corruptions. Long and strong legs, and a tail, akin to a lizard's tail or a dinosaur's, creature of ancient times. It was closer to the unurbanized areas and concrete jungles, where many people were ignorant of the disaster that was not just around those areas, but sprawling within. Pride, a common human folly. Arrogant to think that their minds and fingered hands make them so special. It is often these minds and fingers that cause their own turmoil, as much as their pleasures. But there was more time when they were at the mercy of and were brought down by the many things beyond them. As the horde's numbers grew from parasites scurrying in large swarms, people from almost every corner were eventually found and infested. Only the luckiest that were either already in some decently covered shelters, or were lucky enough to notice the danger and ran into safety, were then assaulted by their enraged counterparts. Strangely enough, but as expected, there were some unusual and extremely lucky ones. These ones managed to fight, but they too will eventually succumb and never escape. Chris stands in shock as the sounds of screams and bones snapping come from his phone. He shouts for his mother and brother. From the video feed, his mother, now transformed, runs after her son. He tries to put the wooden door between them. It holds for a moment, until claws pierce it. Chris's brother drops his phone. Chris hears the door break, bones crunch, and a boy scream. His phone was taken away from him. Russ presses the big red end call button on the screen. Chris falls to his knees, dropping his weapon. Tears drip down his face and onto the floor. Russ puts Chris' phone into a pocket of his pants. Keith walks out of the bedroom with a stack of clothes on his arms and into the corridor, meeting the other two. Hey guys, I got some jeans and leather belts. We can use some additional armor. What happened to him? He sees Chris stooping over his head to the railings of the stairs. Following the movement of his head, Chris looks down the stairs and through a window. Despite the first floor of the house already being half a meter above the streets, the water was rising close. That was his mother on the phone. She's gone now. And my younger brother, Chris says, struggling to make words out of his sobbing. Russ gets down on a knee to help him remove his mask. Keith closes his eyes, trying not to roll them. Russ as if knowing that Keith might say something demeaning. Keith responds, just what I was trying to do. And we should also try to avoid the water. It's rising fast. And I'm not sure how long your sister could last hiding in that closet. Russ looks at Keith and looks down the stairs and then looks up again. He sighs. You got any more of your outlandish ideas? Keith responds, we could build a boat. With what? Russ responds. Keith, with some sarcasm, great minds think alike. I have a bolo. I got another one from the kitchen just earlier. We could start chopping now. And you have a hammer. And then Russ says, even if we did, we neither have the time nor the nails. There's a sofa downstairs and some water gallons. Chris struggles to talk while cleaning his tears and snot. We still have tape, do we? Keith says while dropping the jeans to the floor. Not much. We use most for our weapons and armor. But there are a lot of cables here. Electric fans, microwaves, TV. He walks into a room and drags out a standing fan. Russ adds, "We'll need to remove the foam from the sofa and the water out of those gallons. We just need the frame. Chris, come with me. Keith?" "Yeah, I know." Keith crouches down and reaches for Chris's weapon. It is sword-like. It was longer than an arm and a half. It had a sharp edge inside of its falx-like curve, and a false edge that goes about halfway down the blade. It was attached to a femur bone, with the help of the blade having a bony extended knob from its base. The blade and femur were tied together with shoelaces, and with the help of synthetic rubber contact cement, originally manufactured to put together wood. Keith continues, "We didn't rip that big mistake of a mutating fetus apart for you to leave this." "I'm a mistake." "Don't think like that," Russ says. "You only are a mistake because you dropped your sword." Keith continues, "I helped you make this sword." "We did." Keith stabs it through the wooden floor between the two of them. "Pick it up and don't lose it." Chris wraps his hand on the bone handle. The team gets to work assembling the raft. Chris emptied the water gallons. Russ tore off the foam from the sofa. Keith threw the electrical appliances from the second floor to the bottom. With encouragement from Keith, Chris begins to feel relief from smashing and breaking apart the appliances, even if just a little. "Hey, what do you guys think of Molotov cocktails?" Russ asks loud from the kitchen. Chris turns to Russ. He hears Keith enthusiastically cheer, "Yeah," as he chops apart a bed frame. Chris responds with a more mellow and hesitant reply. "Yeah, yes." Russ gets a bunch of soft drinks and beer bottles, opens them and pours out the content, shoves some towel, rags, and other small pieces of fabric through the muzzle, and then fills them with kitchen oil or rubbing alcohol. All three of them assembled the raft. By the time the raft was complete, the water was over their shoes and soaking the bottom of their pants. Keith checks his armor and weapons. The other two follow. They are still in their school uniforms, button-up white collared shirts and black pants. However, they had their hoodies and raincoats on with books taped around their limbs. They had face masks they got from their school's science laboratory before they escaped. Now they wear improvised denim sleeves under their jackets. Russ has a chair desk taped around his right arm with kitchen knives taped to it. Keith has a pair of bolos, which are a kind of bladed weapon with similar utility origins as a machete. Russ hands Chris's mask to him. "You dropped this earlier." Chris takes it. "Don't forget about this too, bro." Russ finishes the sentence. The team lifts up the raft and tries to fit it through the front door. It would not fit. "We should have checked," Keith says frustratingly. "I thought we were going to fit it through the window," Chris says. Russ adds, "The windows are barred like every other house." Keith retorts, "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" Russ then says, "I thought it would fit through the door too. Whoever had this sofa obviously brought it in somehow." "Okay, what if," Chris says, "we break open the walls?" "Bro, hammering through the cement walls with only a small hammer is gonna take forever," Russ says, rubbing his face with a sigh. "Wait a minute," Keith breaks the silence. "We could break the walls with more than just a small hammer. And it won't take too long." "What? How?" Russ says. "And then we throw it out from upstairs," Keith continued. The two stare at him. Russ adds, "You idiot." The water has reached halfway through the stairs. The raft falls and lands on bed mattresses that were tossed onto the water before it. "It actually worked," Keith cheers. Chris and Russ turn to stare at him and shake their heads. "We gotta get to the raft now. Look over there. He must have heard all of our commotion." Chris points at the distant roofs of dozens of zombies running and pouncing over the roofs of the houses in the shanty town. and behind them stands a tall figure with its pair of great blades. Reaper, Russ says. Let's jump, Keith says. Together, on three. Russ responds, What? No, we can't all fit through the hole. Keith responds, Alright, first two of us, and then one of you. Come on, Chris. Chris says, No, just hurry up. Keith, Alright then, cover me. Keith runs and leaps feet first into the water. Then Chris, and then Russ, followed with the oars from the bed frame. As they paddled through the water, the oars were barely able to control the steering and propel it in any desired direction. The wind and current were so strong, they were in the hands of the typhoon. The zombies were chasing them, parallel to the flooded road on the roofs of the house. They were only 20 meters away. Through the rushing of the wind and rain, they heard the growls and snarls of the creatures. Russ began throwing the cocktails at them. Most missed, but the ones that did hit did not faze any of them. While covered in flames, they continued running. The raft crashed onto a pile of debris, cracking some of the wood. The survivors barely held on, and the raft wobbled back and forth. The current continued to drift the raft as it inched to gain back speed. The zombies lunged and landed in the water. They were reaching for them, the current moving them all at the same pace. Keith cracks his knuckles and draws his pair of bolos. Russ ignites a cocktail, holding it with one hand, and wields his hammer in another. Chris, focusing, concentrating, he breaks through his hesitation and stands up, raising a sword into the air. Russ calls for everyone to hold on. The raft hits debris, tree branches supported by a van only a foot underwater. Chris falls overboard. Keith shouts, calling for him. The raft continues to move. Just as Keith was about to jump, the raft breaks in two. Keith trips and falls into the water. Russ, seeing the zombies continue their chase, threw a cocktail at the branches, burning it and releasing a cloud of dark smoke in between them. Keith surfaces. After staying underwater, tumbling around for what almost felt like hours, grabs into the drifting car, trying to catch his breath, trying to pull back as much air as he lost. As he looks up, a zombie climbs up from the opposite side. Right as it lunges forward, a loud clanging thud strikes it. A long blade goes through it. It was Chris. He jumped from a nearby roof and stabbed it straight through the back. The zombie continues to crawl forward. Chris steps down on it, lifts the sword out of the car roof, but still within the body. He put his back and elbows to it and sliced the blade forward. The zombie's torso is rendered open, with the blade cracked through the skull. The zombie limbs flail down. They see Russ climbing onto a roof on the opposite side of the flooded road with zombies following him. A snarling noise and a roar like thunder echoes and booms through the rain and wind. A dozen zombies stop their pursuit of Russ. They turn and jump into the water towards the two. He turns, and there he is, Reaper. Not more than 50 meters away. Chris stands there, frozen, as the Reaper slowly walks towards them, and the zombies swim on the other side. He could have sworn that he saw those three heads, its eyes glowing, and a smile grinning, stretching all the way to its ears. Keith looks at Chris. He tugs the sword out of the hands of Chris. With a few strong, heavy, but quick strikes, he breaks a large hole through the aluminum roof. He tries to shake Chris, telling him to jump. He barely responds. Keith then just shoves him down. He jumps in after. The water has reached above waist deep on the second floor of that house. In the house, Keith then lifted Chris, put his arm on his shoulder, and moved him through the house. They were at least for a few moments, now out of sight. For a second, while looking up through the hole, Chris thought he saw tentacles, that of a squid, dangling underneath the clouds. Then he blinked, and they were gone. They heard loud sounds of ravaging, clawing, tearing through, around, and above the house. Keith hushed Chris. He pointed into a staircase, submerged underwater. Chris nodded no. Keith looked again. It was a murky, dark gray color. He looked at the wall. It was thin plywood. He looked around. No zombies in sight. But there was a window at the opposite end of the hallway. He pointed to it. Chris nodded yes. While the zombies were clawing, digging, looking for them, the two snuck through the window, peeked around to ensure it was clear, then slowly and carefully climbed waist deep into the flooded road. Then, with their arms on each other's shoulders, they let go of the shanty house and drifted with the stream, with their weapons pointed forward, trying to avoid debris, hoping to be in the same direction where their brother went.